Hello, John here, back at the top of Mount Royal in wonderful Montreal. So in this video I want to talk about, continue on something we talked about in class this morning, which is Johann Hari's Lost Connections. It's just an absolutely fantastic book. I want to talk about the first couple chapters of the book today, which are something that I think everybody living in 2020 needs to know. Right? So in them, Johann Hari talks about how he was diagnosed with depression when he was a teenager. He was always crying. He had this incredible sadness that just didn't seem to necessarily track reality. It was overblown. And he talks about how it was such a revelation, like such a wonderful thing when he found out, oh, the problem is I have a chemical imbalance in my brain. So I have and he calls this serotonin story, right? And how this was a great revelation to him when he realized, oh, the problem is that my brain just doesn't produce enough serotonin. And so this is just a physical problem, right? And he said this was the second story he had been taught. The first one that he was taught was, it's all in your head, you're just a big whiner, you're too much of a wimp, you need to toughen up, you need to stop being such a little wuss. Then he goes, that story was not true and unfair. But then the second story, which is that it's all in your head, right? And you have a disease, you have a chemical imbalance that we can fix because we have these wonderful drugs called SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? These wonder drugs that will fix your problem. And he said he received this like a revelation, like an epiphany. And then he became a kind of, as he puts it, he became an evangelist for antidepressants. He started telling everybody his story, and he started saying, like, yeah, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, if anything, don't be afraid to speak up. We've got to get rid of the whole kind of stigma surrounding mental illness. There's no difference between if you have a physical problem, going to see a doctor to get medication to fix a physical problem. This is exactly the same thing. It's a mental problem. It's exactly the same thing. And he became sold on that story, right? But then he talks about as a journalist, because Johann Hari is a very, very well-known journalist, especially in the UK. He's written on lots of different things. But as a journalist for a long time, he was a big kind of champion for kind of mental illness problems, and saying, and he pushed the idea of, like, there's this, what he calls the serotonin story in a lot of his pieces. He would attack anybody who suggested that maybe these drugs didn't work. But then he started seeing, like, some very disturbing information just in his regular investigative journalism. He discovered that actually it looked like a lot of these medications didn't really work as well as they were supposed to. And then he saw in himself as well that even though he had been on these medications for a long time, it still seemed like he was still depressed, right? And the medications would work for a little while, but then they would stop working, and so he would go to his doctor, and they would either kind of increase the dose, or they would say, well, maybe this medication's not working for you anymore, and so they would prescribe something else, and he would go on that. And also, of course, he had lots of side effects from the drugs. He, as most people do when they go on these kinds of drugs, he put on a lot of weight. He also had trouble sleeping. He felt kind of foggy in the head, couldn't think straight very often, had sleeping difficulties, right? So he starts looking into this, into what these drugs actually do, and what he finds out is, well, I'm not going to give it all away, but because I want you to go and read the book, but what he discovered is that, in fact, there had never been a definitive proof of what's called the serotonin story. There never was. In fact, there had been experiments where they had looked into it, where they had given people a drug which reduces your serotonin severely. Now, if it's true that all depression and anxiety is largely a function of serotonin, that you don't have enough serotonin, then it follows, among other things, that if you were to give somebody a drug that reduces their serotonin dramatically, well, then they should suddenly start to feel very unhappy, right? They should start to feel very depressed, very anxious. That didn't happen. In numerous experiments, when they reduced people's serotonin, it had no appreciable effect on their mood whatsoever, right? Which means that although serotonin may probably does have something to do with mood, it's not the sort of the one pure silver bullet that people made it out to be, right? And while it's true that actually increasing people's serotonin does seem to make them like really, really giddy and very happy and things like that, it doesn't seem to necessarily stay that way long term. Right? Anyway, so I'll summarize what he finds. I mean, actually, if you read the book, it reads like almost like those first couple chapters like a murder mystery, where he's sort of uncovering all these different things and talking to these researchers at Harvard and Yale and at McGill here at Montreal, and all these researchers are telling him like, oh yeah, we've all known about this for a while, but the drug companies are making $100 billion off of these drugs, and that basically, that kind of money buys you a lot of PR, it buys you a lot of pull within magazines, within journals. Anyway, it's this whole crazy, it sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but it actually all checks out. And when the book first came out, I actually went and looked into all of his sources because I was a little bit skeptical. It sounded like a wacky conspiracy theory at first, but it checks out. It absolutely checks out. Anyway, so here's the bottom line. The bottom line, what he found out is that most of these drugs, things like Prozac, Wellbutrin, Paxil, all of these things, most of them, first of all, they only work on about 25% of the people who take them. Right? About 25% of the people who take them have a positive result from these drugs. Right? However, that positive result does not persist. It doesn't last. Right? So it seems to go for a little while, usually about 4 months. Sometimes a little bit longer, but after that, most people, the positive result that they had from the drug wears off. Right. So if the depression or the anxiety is still an issue, it comes back. Right. Now, just as a footnote before I say the rest of this crazy story, very often people get very depressed or anxious because of something to do with their life at that time, right? There's something going on in their life that is, maybe they just went through a bad breakup, or somebody that they love just died, or they've just, whatever, they just lost their job, or something really serious happened in their life, right? And so they are depressed or anxious because of that particular situation, right? But if they didn't take any drugs, if they didn't see a therapist, if there was no interventions whatsoever, most people's depression or anxiety will just go away, right, by itself. This is the same thing with anything, right? With a cold, with most medical conditions are self-limiting. They pass, right? So if you had, let's say you had like a cold remedy, and you told people, take this cold remedy, and you said like 100% of people who take this cold remedy are cured of their cold, right? Well, most of us would recognize right away there's something wrong with that, right? What's wrong with that is that colds go away for the most part, even if you don't take anything, right? You don't need to necessarily take anything to make them go away. So the problem with this way of thinking about it is that since in almost all of the studies where they would take these drugs and say how effective are they don't take into account the fact that most of these kind of mental health problems clear up on their own, right? So you have people taking these drugs, which he mentions that he was on Paxil for 10 years. And he was absolutely furious when he found out that when he had first been prescribed Paxil, it was well known in the literature. It was, in fact, they were, the company that makes Paxil was fined millions of dollars by the state of New York for false advertising. They knew that to the extent to which it worked, it only worked for a few months, and then the positive effect wore off, right? And yet he was taking it for 10 years, right? Now, so about 25% of people who take these drugs, on average, get a positive result from the drugs, right? But as I said, that positive result does not last long term. It wears off, right? Another 25% who take these drugs get no result whatsoever. It doesn't help them in any way. It's just, they might as well be taking nothing, right? Then they found 50% of the result, of the benefit that people get from these medications is due to the placebo effect. Right? Now, we've talked about that already in class a fair amount. The placebo effect is quite fascinating, right? It's this amazing ability of the mind to, if you believe that, if you have an explanation for what's wrong with you, and if you believe that you have a solution, that will actually work for a number of people. And this is well documented. It's very, very well documented, but it's still something that messes with people when you try and explain it to them, because it just seems so unbelievable. But there's plenty of examples of it. I mean, one of the ones I was reading about recently, which just blew my mind, was during World War I. This happened again during the Vietnam War. It happened again. It happened before that in World War II a number of times, but it especially happened, one of the first big kind of studies of this was during World War I. So you had all of these battlefield injuries where people were just so many casualties on a scale that had never been seen before in warfare. And so very often the medics that were in the field, they would run out of painkillers. They would run out of, whatever it was, morphine or ketamine or whatever they had in the field. And so they would end up having to operate on people. We're talking like cutting off limbs, doing like some pretty serious shit, right? They would have to do this to people in the field, and they were out of painkillers. Well, what some of them would do is they would fill up a hypodermic needle with just some, some salt water or saline solution or anything, right? Just something else. And they would tell them, okay, I'm gonna inject you with this morphine. It's gonna take the edge off the pain, and then we're gonna take, whatever, that piece of shrapnel out of your leg, right? And they would inject them with this stuff that was like fucking nothing, like absolutely nothing. And most of these soldiers would report feeling a warm glow come over them, and the pain suddenly was drastically reduced. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating how powerful our minds are, right? And I've seen, I mean, you can look it up if you want to see, like, there's some really fantastic demonstrations of this where people who have like a swollen jaw, right? They take something that they believe is an anti-inflammatory. It's nothing, it's a placebo, and suddenly their swelling goes down. I know a friend of mine actually participated in a study of this. It was done at McGill a number of years back, and they would sort of have like a bunch of people who had headaches, right? And then when they got the headaches, they asked them to take, you know, and there would be like a bunch of different pills, right? And one would be just a sugar pill, but it was made to look exactly like the kind of painkiller that they normally take. So if you normally take ibuprofen, it would look exactly like your ibuprofen tablet. If you normally take acetaminophen, Tylenol, it would look just like that. If you normally take aspirin, you get the picture, right? So then they would give you some of these pills, and they would give some people placebos, some people the real thing, and they would ask them, okay, when you get like, let's say, I don't know, let's say you get really bad headaches every month, like during menstruation or something like that, like when you get your period, or let's say you get them, you know, whatever, you get bad headaches with some regularity. So then when you would have those bad headaches, they would tell you, take one or two of the pills that we gave you, and then record whether it actually worked, whether it actually like helped your symptoms and got rid of them, right? And what they found is that if I remember correctly, this one study, they found that 30% of people who had sugar pills reported that they got a great deal of relief from the sugar pill, right? Now, that may sound like, I'm not sure exactly how that sounds to you. Like, that might sound impressive to you. If it doesn't sound impressive to you and you're like, well, 30%, that's not that great. But when you compare it to the fact that people who take ibuprofen or aspirin or whatever it is that they take for headaches, those things don't help people 100% of people 100% of the time. They don't actually. Even if you take something regularly that works for you, chances are it usually only works about 70% of the time. I mean, I have chronic allergies, and I have to take antihistamines and things like that. And if you look at the potency and the success of antihistamines, most of the ones that are on the market are useful for about maybe 40% of people, 50% of people. I think like the best ones on the market, like Allegra, which I take, I think Allegra has a success rate of about 70%, right? So these are very successful medications, and they're still only, 30 or 40% is better than a sugar pill, right? That total placebo. So the mind is very, very powerful in terms of working this out. Now, when it comes to mental health problems, depression and anxiety, it seems like the placebo effect is really, really important, right? The placebo effect is accounting for about 50% of the usefulness of these things, right? Now, here's the hitch, right? If these medications, if they were just simply placebos, if they were just bullshit, like most homeopathic stuff or herbal remedies or all that other crap, right? Like, if it was just, if that's all it was, then you could say that, well, okay, it's kind of harmless, maybe. I mean, because it's not really doing any harm, maybe, and some people are getting benefited by the placebo effect, right? However, that's not true, right? That's not true at all. In fact, we now know that these medications are not benign. These medications have a lot of side effects. They have some very serious side effects. They, over 75% of people who take them report that it very much impairs them sexually. They either have drastically reduced sex drive, or they have reduced sensitivity of the sex organs, which makes it really hard for them to have pleasurable sex. Johann talks about this in Lost Connections quite a bit in terms of his own personal experience. Also, people have these things cause almost everybody to gain a lot of weight, right? Which is not healthy for you. And also, I mean, the first time I heard about that, I thought, well, that sucks. So you're depressed and you're anxious and you're in a really bad place, and so you take these drugs that cause you to put on 40 pounds. Yeah, I'm sure that's gonna really help your mood. But anyway, and they cause various kinds of other problems. Like a lot of them cause people to, they mess with your body's ability to regulate your heating system. So people will get like really sweaty all the time, randomly, like, and they don't understand why, or they'll get really cold on a regular basis, and they don't understand why. It can really mess with people's digestion. Also, there's a lot of indication that antidepressants, especially when given to teenagers, can actually drastically increase the likelihood that they will commit suicide. This is suicidal ideation is one of the main side effects of a lot of these medications, which I think is just absolutely a cruel, cruel irony that you're taking something that's supposed to be helping the fact that you're really depressed and anxious, and it actually can make you so depressed and anxious that you take your own life. I mean, that's just absolutely horrible. So instead, so what Johann says is that, and he had to come to terms with the fact that he had been sold on this solution to his problem, which was not working, was having all these bad side effects. So he decides finally at the age of 31, after being on these medications for all of his adult life, since he was like a 16-year-old, he decides to actually go off of them, and he starts to address what he believes are the root causes of the epidemic of depression and anxiety that we are witnessing right now. Right now, maybe in a future video I'll go into what he says those root causes are in more detail. He identifies 9 of them. Suffice it to say for now that ultimately what Johann says, and I find this to be very, very convincing. He says we need to stop thinking of depression and anxiety as the thing that we have to get rid of, right? Instead, we have to start thinking of depression and anxiety as symptoms, right? So the way I think about it is, if my hand is over, if you come, I don't know, let's say I'm here on this mountain, right? If my hand is over a fire and it's burning, right? And you see this, right? The solution to that problem, if you come and say, you're not going to say, okay, well, I'm going to give you this very powerful painkiller, which is going to get rid of the pain that you're feeling in your hand, right? And get rid of that pain. No, you're going to tell me the problem is that your hand is in the fire. You need to take your hand out of the fire. That's the problem, right? The pain that you're feeling is just a message from your body telling you that you need to get your hand out of that fire, right? And you're gonna help me and encourage me to get my hand out of the fire, right? Likewise, if your core temperature goes below a certain amount, you will start to involuntarily shiver, right? right? Your teeth will chatter, you'll start to shiver, and shivering is an involuntary reaction of the body where your muscles are moving to try and warm you up, right? Because you are too cold. I don't know if you've ever had hypothermia. I have a couple of times, and what's amazing is you cannot stop shivering, like just violently shivering, and your teeth chattering. My teeth were chattering so much once because I got really freezing cold. That's a kind of a crazy story. Maybe I'll tell you about it sometime over a beer. But it involved a snow hut and a girl. I was a teenager. But anyway, so I got really bad hypothermia, and my teeth were chattering so much that I actually I chipped one of my teeth. It was this war wound. But anyway, so likewise, if you saw somebody outside in the middle of winter in Montreal and they are like shivering like crazy, right? Would you say to that person, here is a pill that will stop your shivering because your shivering is really annoying and it's like to get rid of that? No. You would, if you're a decent person, you would give the person a blanket, you would give them a coat, or you would invite them inside and give them like a warm drink and help them warm up, right? Because the problem is not that they're shivering uncontrollably, just like the problem is that they're freezing and they need help with that problem, right? Likewise, Johann Hari says we need to stop seeing depression and anxiety as that is the problem that needs to be addressed, and we need to just get rid of that. He says instead we need to see that depression and anxiety are they are messages from your body, from your brain, saying that there is something wrong, right? And the something wrong is not you, right? Your brain is not the problem. You are not the problem, right? Your life is the problem. Your context is the problem. Right? You are, in the same way that somebody who is not getting the nutritional requirements that they need, they're not getting enough of vitamin C, right? They're going to get scurvy. They're not getting enough of this particular vitamin or mineral. They're going to start to show signs of nutritional deficiencies. Well, for Johann Hari, depression and anxiety are signs that you are not getting your emotional psychological, spiritual needs met, right? And our society has become really bad at meeting these basic human needs that we have for connection to other people, connection to meaningful work, connection to meaningful values, connection to nature. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's sort of the second part of his book, but suffice to say for now that for the purposes of this class, The Pursuit of Happiness, I think this is a very important message for you all to get early on, that the problem of happiness is a philosophical, sociological problem that cannot be solved with a pill. All right, thanks. Take care. Bye for now.